Photographer and architects, a professional collaboration. The relation between photographer and architects constitutes a field of research with two main aims. One is to analyze the complicity between the photographer and the architect. The other is to study the contribution of photography to the diffusion not only of the image of architecture during a certain period, but also of a work or set of works, or of the production of a certain architect. Architecture has been present in photographers' registrations since the invention of photography in the 19th century, and has assumed essentially a documentary function. As mentioned by Simone Marchand-Fils, almost accidentally, one of the first functions of architectural photography was to visually inventory patrimony for its historical record or plausible restoration through the methods in criminology or botany in an incipient culture of the archive. The photographic archive and document are still fundamental as a source for enlarging the research scope of 19th and 20th century architecture, in particular as concerns the photos commissioned by architects for professional purposes. Other aspects of the relation between photographers and architects were approached simultaneously by architecture theoreticians and historians. For instance, Beatriz Colomina demonstrated that architecture photography has been used for purposes beyond a mere documental function. This can be found in some modern architects, including Le Corbusier or Mies van der Rohe, the latter being a good illustration on the point that modern architecture is a form of media. Modern architecture becomes modern not simply by using glass, steel or reinforced concrete as it is usually understood, but by engaging with the media, with publications, competitions, exhibitions. The participation of architects of the School of Oporto in publications, contexts and exhibitions determined the establishment of a prolific and highly valuable collaboration with the photographer Teófilo Rego. A new generation of Oporto architects found in the exhibition a way to diffuse their work and contact people from whom one expected understanding for and acceptance of the architectural choices brought by this new generation of architects. The exhibition was organized by ODAM, Organization of Modern Architects, in 1951 in favor of modern architecture was crucial in this process, and it became a sort of model for later exhibitions. This exhibition was organized with great care and by taking into account the exhibits and the message to be conveyed. In order to achieve this, the organizers used and adapted versions of the Siam grid as well as placards with photographs of the works and their respective identification and caption. The Odam architects were influenced by the modern movement and by the Siam into establishing a relationship with a non-specialized audience, conceived this exhibition in order to explain the reasons why they defended modern architecture. The exhibition motto was taken from a text that had been published by the Museum of Modern Art of New York. What is modern architecture? Our buildings are different from the buildings of the past due to the fact that we live in a different world. The exhibition featured 32 works by 22 architects, including finished works, works underway, and still in project. Among the participants were architects who had, at one time or another during their career, commissioned photographs of their work from photographer Teófilo Rego. That is the case of, for example, Arménio Loza, Cassiano Barbosa, Agostinho Rica Gonçalves, José Carlos Loureiro, Viana de Lima, João Anderson, and Fernando Távora. The ODAM exhibition projects cover a diversity of programs such as pousadas, detached houses and blocks of flats, factories, hotels, swimming pools and exhibition pavilions. These projects were either executed or planned for Porto and its surroundings, Vila do Conde, Póvoa de Varzim, Guimarães and Gerês, Sus stretching throughout a vast area in northern Portugal. Teófilo Rego knew this region very well because a great part of his professional work consists of photos of architecture, artistic heritage and regional festivals in that area. 2 years later, in 1953, another exhibition was organized in Oporto to pay homage to architect Marques da Silva, showing many of his works but also work by his former students. Despite its different aim, this exhibition was fundamental for the strengthening of the professional relationship of Teófilo Rego with the city's architects. The photographs of the work by Marques da Silva and the exhibition room and respective placards were taken by Teófilo Rego. We argue that this commission rendered possible for Rego to collaborate with a wide group of young professionals that chose him during 3 decades to photograph their projects, designs and scale models and their built work. Also in 1953, Carlos Ramos, director of the Oporto School of Fine Arts, fostered the first of what would become known as the Magna exhibitions, whose aim was to show to the public the works of the masters and students of architecture, sculpture and painting who had obtained the best marks in the previous year. Teófilo Rego was again selected as the official photographer of the first Magna and of the later exhibitions organized by the school. The conditions as though been established for Rego's professional recognition as the best professional to photograph the works of the architects and the artists from the Oporto School of Fine Arts. Bearing in mind the reflections of Beatriz Colomina, that enables us to understand the future relationship between Rego and the architects who were his clients. We share the idea that modern architecture was also created by pictures and publications, and this space is for the most part two-dimensional, and at a certain point architecture somehow internalizes that space, that flatness. The three-dimensional world becomes a photographic surface. This needs to overcome the two-dimension and affirm architecture's three-dimensional character can perhaps explain the fact that architects started commissioning more and more photographs of their scale models. The scale models create a nearest to reality. For example, the possibility to carry out the project becomes more real, more attractive and more understandable for the client. The two-hole staging process that was conceived by Teófilo Rego based on the scale model and in which he often had the collaboration and the complicity of his clients resulted in an image that would dazzle the client, spectator. Beatriz Colomina argues that the photographs of Mies, Le Corbusier, Charles and Ray Eames scale models were taken from different angles both during the day and at night and later selected. She further adds that, in fact, architects never seem too tired of looking at their models. They even photograph themselves doing so. Colomina gives an example of a photograph from the exhibition of Mies van der Rohe's work that was organized in 1947 at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, where van der Rohe is leaning over the scale design of the farmhouse house as if he had never seen it before, his large head acting like a camera. These remarks apply to the scale models of the architects of Oporto. For example, Teófilo Rego photographed them from different angles with studio light outside, with natural light, or simulating a night illumination. Most of the scale models that were photographed were detached houses, blocks of flats, and urban sets, the type project that was most frequent between the 1950s and the 1970s. There are also photographs of some church models and, to a lesser extent but equally important, of scale models for architecture competitions. The architects from the School of Oporto were acquainted with the photographs of the works by modern architects through international journals such as L'Architecture d'aujourd'hui, the Architectural Review, Architectural Design, Architectural Forum, Dosmus, Casabella. They also had access to the publication of the work by Le Corbusier, who was the most quoted and recognized architect of this generation of architects, and who also constitutes a paradigmatic case of the long-standing complicity from 1949 to 1965 between an architect and a photographer, in this case Lucien Hervé. Equally important was the participation of the Portuguese architects and students in the competition promoted by the UIA, International Union of Architects, whose results were published in several journals, more precisely the journal that was published by this organization, but also Architecture d'aujourd'hui, Baumeister, Architectural Review, and Architecture Chronica. Eamon Nicholas states that the projects for the competitions of the 1950s and 1960s lack in aesthetics and perpetuate the taste for axonometric points of view of black line from the 1930s. However, black and white photography and scale models presented at competitions became increasingly important. The information diffused by international publications certainly influenced the work of Teófilo Rego, either in a conscious manner or according to the instructions of his clients regarding the way they wanted their works to be photographed. As said before, the whole process of scale models photograph is based, to a great extent, in a professional collaboration of complicity between the photographer and the architect. The architect's collaboration in the preparation of the photographic production of the scale models of their works in the studio or in the atelier leads us to conclude that the architect's eye is present in the choice of the plans and settings. It must be mentioned that the results are not uniform and some works are of better quality than others. Settings, light, detail. On the other hand, the suppression and manipulation made by Teófilo Rego of innumerous negatives of both sketched and executed works, though it may result from a dialogue established with the client, seem to represent a bigger intervention by the photographer. Whether or not this is true, the result has a double interest. On one hand, it constitutes an important document for the history of modern architects. On the other hand, the quality of his photographs as autonomous artistic objects assures him a place in the history of photography. We must, however, keep in mind that the valorization of the unusual plasticity of some images after technical intervention to obtain a certain result, perhaps at the request of the client, results from a contemporary evaluation based on the criteria that did not exist at the time. We do not know to what extent Portuguese architects of the 1950s and 1960s used photography in order to register their own work. However, we do know that some of them, for instance, António Sena da Silva or the duet Vítor Paula Costa Martins, achieved an important place in the history of photography. We also know that photography was the tool chosen by architects' teams to register the extensive inventory of Portuguese vernacular architecture made during the Survey on Regional Architecture promoted in the mid-1950s by the Architects' Union with official support. Photography would have the most important place in the work Arquitetura Popular em Portugal, 1961, which results from these surveys. Without a doubt, photography was already a necessary and very popular instrument among the architects of the 1950s, probably because it had become easier to purchase cameras. However, we also believe that the price of photograph development and printing, as well as the need for very good quality images, perpetuated the relationship between architects and photographers, including Teófilo Rego. The approach we proposed in this paper articulates the relation of one photographer with several architects based on the analysis of the pictures he took of their works. However, the final destination of each picture still remains unknown. We know for certain that what happened in the following cases: Anderson and the Competition of Sagres, José Carlos Loureiro and the Palácio de Cristal, commissioned by the Town Hall of Oporto, Hermínio Beato de Oliveira and Magalhães Carneiro, with the competition A Travelling Theatre for UIA. However, the impact of pictures on Portuguese journals dedicated to architecture has still to be studied, so that it remains impossible for us to perceive the importance of Teófilo Rego in the construction of the image of modern architecture. What we do know is that Rego remained anonymous in most of the publications. This justifies the importance of the current study of his estate as the only way to identify both his unpublished and published works, thereby contributing to the history of photography of architecture in Portugal.